Hello, my name is Samuel Fernández, and I work the Faculty of Theology at the Pontificia Universidad Católica de Chile. I'm very grateful and happy to have the chance to speak to you. Today we wish to reflect on Origen and the interpretation of the contemporary events. In these times of pandemic, some voices arise proposing theological interpretations of the coronavirus. A religious leader said, "This is not a disease, but a punishment of God." According to another religious leader, it is evident by naked eye that coronavirus is a divine punishment. But is it possible to attempt a theological interpretation of the pandemic? Or more in general, it is possible to attempt a theological interpretation of current history? The aim of this talk is to reflect on the theological interpretation of history according to Origen. Therefore, we are not going to reflect on the historicity of the biblical narratives, but on the possibility of finding a theological meaning of post-biblical history, that is, the history contemporary to Origen. The talk focuses on the fourth book on First Principle, that is, the treatise on the Scriptures. The first part of this book deals with the significance of history to clarify the nature of the Scripture, and therefore contains a deep reflection on the interpretation of current history. Origen seeks to strengthen our faith with reason. For this purpose, he seeks to prove the divine character of the Scriptures. He could not take for granted the divine inspiration of the Bible, because on First Principle, he wanted to strengthen our faith with reason. To achieve this purpose, he turns to the historical observation of the astonishing expansion of Christianity, which was an already traditional topic. Many legislators, Origen argues, would have wanted their laws to govern the whole world, but none of them have succeeded. Yet, every land, Origen says, Greek and barbarian, throughout the world, contains thousands of followers who have abandoned ancestral laws for the observance of the laws of Moses and the discipline of the words of Jesus Christ, even though those who adhere to the law of Moses are hated by the worshippers of idols, and those who accept the word of Jesus Christ, in addition to being hated, are in danger of death. The text emphasizes that this amazing historical result has been achieved under adverse conditions, that is, in spite of the fact that those who adhere to Christianity risk even death. Moreover, this vast expansion has taken place extremely quickly. I quote, "And if we consider how, in a very few years, the word has been able to be preached everywhere throughout the world, so that Greeks and barbarians, wise and foolish, have submitted themselves to the worship of God through Jesus Christ, we shall not hesitate to say that the matter is more than human, Jesus having taught with all authority that his word should prevail." Origen's way of reasoning expresses his understanding of the relationship between history and Scripture. The rapid spread of Christianity, that is, this historical fact, confirms the authenticity of the words of Jesus, that is, the Scripture. The historical event confirmed the divine character of the words of Jesus. The reasoning continues to bring up the persecutions. I quote, "So that one may reasonably regard as oracles those utterances of his, such as, 'You shall be brought before governors and rulers for my sake,' that he uttered these words speaking in vain, so that they were not true, was perhaps possible. But when what was said with so much authority has come to pass, it shows that God, having truly become man, delivered to human beings the doctrines of salvation." The reasoning can be summarized as follows. Contemporary historical events confirm the voices with which Jesus had announced the expansion of Christianity and the persecutions. Then this consistency between the words of Jesus and the historical events shows that Jesus' voices are to be considered oracles. In other terms, actual historical events, in this case the expansion of Christianity and the persecutions of the 3rd century, are the support for proving the divine identity of Jesus, and thus the divinity of his words. According to Origen, this argumentation is rational. It is interesting to know that in this reasoning, it is history that proves the value of the words spoken by Jesus. The book of Genesis announced that with the coming of Christ, the rulers of Israel will cease. Origen then remarked, I quote, "For it is visibly clear from the history and from what is seen today that from the times of Jesus there were no longer those who were called kings of the Jews." Again, Origen's reasoning is remarkable. He argues from the facts of his contemporary history. According to him, what is seen today proves the divinity of Jesus and therefore the inspiration of his words and the ancient prophecies about him. On the other hand, with unusual reasoning, Origen seeks to show the divine character of the scriptures from the reader's own experience. I quote, "One who reads the prophetic words with care and attention, experiencing from the act of reading itself a trace of divine inspiration, will be convinced through the things he experiences that the words believed by us to be of God are not compositions of human beings." The expression is dense. In the reading experience, one perceives suffer a trace of inspiration, and this indicates that the prophecies are not merely human writings, but words of God. Human experience, then, like history, manifests the divine character of the scriptures. At various points of his reasoning, Origen has asserted that the historical event manifests the divine character of Jesus. From this observation, he makes a particular turn in his reasoning and introduces a surprising argument. I quote, "In demonstrating in summary fashion the divinity of Jesus and using the prophetic words regarding him, we simultaneously demonstrate that the writings professing him are divinely inspired, and that the words announcing his coming and his teaching were spoken with all power and authority. The reasoning is unusual. Origen, from the divinity of Christ, demonstrates the inspiration of the scripture. In this way, it is Jesus who gives authority to the scriptures. Thus, the recognition of Christ is, in a sense, prior to the acceptance of the inspiration of the prophets, and not vice versa, as would be the case with the conventional form of argumentation. In fact, the traditional apologetics sought to demonstrate the divinity of Jesus from the scriptures. Origen, in turn, shows the divine character of the scriptures from the divinity of Jesus. Nevertheless, the departing point of Origen's argumentation is history. That is, all his reasoning was based on his interpretation of contemporary events. However, Origen recognizes that things are not simple and that the interpretation of both scripture and recent history involves many difficulties. He expresses this in the following passage. I quote, "To which must also be added that the divine character and the divine inspiration, both of the prophets and the law of Moses, have been most clearly brought to light and proved from the point that Christ arrived to this world. For before those things which were foretold by them were fulfilled, although they were true and inspired by God, they nevertheless could not be shown to be true because they were not yet proved to have been fulfilled. The coming of Christ manifested the divine character of the prophecies, because in the history of Jesus, the prophecies were fulfilled. Therefore, before the coming of Christ, it was almost impossible to show the inspiration of the prophecies. Once again, the historical events linked to the life of Jesus make shine out the inspired nature of the prophetic text. The biblical text, then, does not justify itself. It is the historical events that show the inspired nature of the text. Origen, who holds that interpreting the scripture is excessively difficult for human beings, also highlights that interpreting historical events is very difficult. He therefore proposes a parallelism between the interpretation of the scripture and the interpretation of history. I quote, "But if the suprahuman meaning of every part of the scripture that does not seem to present itself to the uninstructed, no wonder, for with respect to the works of that providence which embraces the whole world, some appear most clearly to be works of providence, while others are concealed in such a way as to seem to furnish ground for disbelief in that God who orders all things with unspeakable skill and power." Historical events do not always manifest their providential character, just as the letter of the scriptures do not always show their divine character. Both the providential nature of the events and the divine character of the biblical texts are often hidden. According to Origen, divine providence is more evident in the stars than in human events. Origen takes history seriously, to the point of stating that the deep meaning of human events is sometimes so hidden that it seems to provide ground for disbelief in God. The difficulty of recognizing the presence of the providence in history was a problem that also troubled Hellenistic philosophy. Then Origen concludes that just as providence is not annulled on account of those things which are not understood, so neither is the divinity of Scripture annulled, because our weakness cannot in every expression approach the hidden splendor of the teaching concealed in humble language. For we have a treasure in earthen vessels. Current history, then, not only manifests, but also hides divine providence. Origen takes history seriously. He, as a theologian, on the one hand declares his belief that God is present in history, and on the other he acknowledged that many times history is not understandable, and that historical events even provide ground for disbelief in God. Origen indeed is an honest theologian. That's why he has the courage to affirm that historical event give rise to disbelief in God. Origen tries to maintain two tenets, which are in tension with one another. He believes in the complete rationale of God equity, and therefore in the complete rationale of human history, whereas he affirms that the inequality of individual circumstances preserves the equality of universal retribution. Actually, he declares, from all these considerations, it is shown that all those events that happened in this world are brought about neither by God nor yet without God. He does not know how to explain the actual relationship between God and history, that is, between providence and free will. Nevertheless, he says that even God is not responsible for each historical event. He is not absent from history. Indeed, human history as a whole has a providential rationale, yet human mind, in its current condition, is not able to find the providential meaning of every particular event. I quote, "Not relying, then, on our own intelligence, but on the wisdom, even though we are meanwhile not able to assert how, we shall nevertheless, trusting in his mercy, attempt to inquire and examine how that great diversity of the world may appear to be consistent with the whole rationale of righteousness. I say rational, of course, in a general sense, for it is the mark of an ignorant person to seek, and of a foolish person to give the particular rationale for each event." Origen does not know how to explain the actual relationship between God and history, that is, between divine providence and human free will. Nevertheless, as a honest believer and theologian, he stressed that although God is not responsible for each historical event, the Creator is always present in history. Thank you very much.